All right, guys, so today we are going to learn how to make a business card inside of InDesign. This is a job that you could do inside of Photoshop or even Illustrator, but you can also do it right inside of InDesign. There's a few things that are unique and different to InDesign, but since InDesign is basically designed for doing multi-page layouts, the idea of doing a business card in InDesign makes perfect sense. And so what we'll do is we'll hop into this today, and I'll show you how to add all of these elements. Feel free to change the sizes or the colors, but hopefully you'll learn some stuff about moving shapes around, using the eyedropper tool. There's a lot to learn inside of this lesson, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, guys, so the first thing we want to do is go to File, New, Document. And what we're going to do is we're going to go over to where it says Print, and we're going to choose the letter standard size, 8.5 by 11. Now we're going to modify these settings for our needs, but let's go ahead and just start with this. And when I come over here, I'm going to give it a title. I'm going to call it Business Card _ Taylor. And where it says width, I'm going to set it to 7 inches and give it a height of 4 inches. And so currently that's twice the size of a business card. I'll go ahead and shrink that down later. But for now, we'll start with that, and I'm going to set the pages to 2 pages. Number 1 will be our start page. And then we'll go over to where it says columns, and I'm going to set that to 3. Now, we're not going to need a gutter in the beginning, so we'll go ahead and set that down to 0. You'll see when we get to the design how that all works. And as far as the margins, I'm going to set those to 0 as well, but I'll change that later. For now, we definitely want margins, but while we're setting up the shapes, we don't need them. So we won't need margins until we get to the text. And as far as the bleed, I'm going to set that to a standard bleed of 0.125. And I'm not going to have any slug on this one. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to hit Create. And this is the document it's going to give me. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to divide this roughly into thirds. Notice how we have it in thirds horizontally. I'm going to grab a guide and drag it down. What are we looking at here? 0 to 4. A third of that would be about 2.6. So I'm going to drag this down to just over 2.5. I'll set it to 2 3/4. Now, if you want this to snap right to this number, you can hold down Shift, and that will help the guides to snap into units of 10, or at least snap to these markers. I've got this one at 2.75. We're going to go ahead and start adding some colors to these lower boxes. And one of the things I want to do in this tutorial is just show you the quickest way to create multiple boxes that are the same size, even if they're different colors. So let's go ahead and just grab the rectangle tool. And one thing you need to remember in InDesign is that we want to include this bleed area. So I'm going to start right up here where the guide intersects with the columns, and I'm going to click and drag down to the corner of the bleed. There you go. And that's going to snap right in there. Now currently this doesn't have a fill or a stroke. If I want to give it a fill, I can come over to my Properties panel, and right where it says Fill, you can see there's a red line through the color. Now, make sure that this is selected before you do this. And if for any reason you click off, you can always just grab your selection tool and just click and drag a box, and it'll select anything that's underneath that box. All right, so we go to Fill, and I'm going to go ahead and pick a couple of analogous colors for these 3 boxes. And analogous just means that they are similar. So for me, rather than using some preset swatches, I'm going to go over to this little palette right here that says Color. And if I click on that, you can see that this gives me the ability to sort of select these colors specifically rather than using a pre-made swatch. And if for any reason you're not seeing this here, you can go up to the little hamburger and just click it onto CMYK. CMYK is the standard color mode for print, and not just like home printers, but if you're actually sending this to a print shop to get this printed, they generally will print in CMYK. If you're printing it at home, you could definitely use RGB and you wouldn't suffer any repercussions of using that color mode. So I'm I'm going to come over here to where the yellow is, and I'm going to slide over to just about orange. Now, just to be clear, if you're new to this color picker, you can see that up top is white, and that's where we basically start to lighten the color as we go up. And down at the bottom is black, which is going to add black to the color. So if you want the truest color, it's pretty much right in the middle here. So I'm going to go just over to the side and pick an orange. And notice it fills that in right away. Rather than dragging out another box, what I'm going to do is I have the selection tool currently selected. And so I'm just going to hold down the Option key and drag out a copy over to the left here. Now, because we don't have the same outer bleed, notice we're hanging over just a little bit. That's okay. We'll just click right here and tuck that right up against that column marker. And rather than dragging this one over, I'm going to go back to the first one and hold down Option because this one has the bleed and drag it all the way over to the right. And now you can see that very quickly, without having to switch tools, we now have boxes in each of these categories. And what we can do to change the colors is simply click on them. And now that it's selected, if I go up to where it says Fill, and I go back to the color palette, I'm just going to put my mouse just a little bit further over to the right. Or I could actually just use one of these sliders and maybe add some yellow to the color, but in this case I'll use the color picker. And I'll just go for something in between orange and yellow, like that right there. Kind of a mustard yellow. And then I'll select this one over here and do the same thing. We'll go back to the color palette and I'll go for kind of a true yellow on this one. And there we go. So again, the term analogous colors just refers to colors that sort of live next to each other on the color wheel. And so we can go ahead and click off. And now we're going to grab one more rectangle. And again, I could just copy this rectangle. In fact, let's go ahead and just do that rather than dragging out the rectangle tool. I'm going to hold down Option and drag this up to the upper left bleed. And then I'll just grab the corner here and stretch it out to fill the rest of the image. For this color, I want a color that's going to be contrasting these yellows and oranges. So I'm going to use something like a blue. That way I can get sort of maximum pop by using what we call a complementary color. And there we go. Now I'm going to end up lowering the opacity on this later so that we can see the image behind it. But this gives us a nice combination, kind of a split complementary, where we have 3 analogous colors and 1 complementary color. Technically, we've added in 1 additional color to a split complementary, and that works fine for a situation where we need 4 colors. So now that we have that done, we're going to add in some little icons. Over here on the left, this is where we'll have our phone number. On the right, this is where we'll have our email address, and over here is where we'll have our business address. And so what we need to do now is we need some circles that we're going to put the icons inside of. So we just used the rectangle tool. Now let's go back to the rectangle tool, but this time let's hold down the mouse until we get the ellipse tool. So if you hold down your mouse on the rectangle tool, you'll see the ellipse tool option pop up, and we're going to select that. Before we add in these shapes, we do want to add some additional guides to our image. And what we want to do is we want to put a guide right in the middle of each of these squares. So we'll go ahead and put our mouse on the left-hand side inside the rulers. And as I drag this out, this will snap to the center. It looks like 1.1042 is going to be the center. Now for the center one, the actual center one, we could just line it up with these control points. These little white squares right here, because those are always in the dead center. Same thing, we have them on the sides over here too. And now let's go ahead and drag out one more guide for the last box. And again, I'm just kind of waiting for it to snap. And there we go. So now we have kind of these little crosshairs where we can just line up our circles. With the ellipse tool selected, what we're going to do is we're going to put our mouse right over these. In fact, I'm going to zoom in. Once I zoom in, you can see I kind of lost my lower squares. So I'm going to hold down the space bar and drag the document up so that I can see it better. Okay, so now that I want to drag out those circles, what I want to do is put my mouse right over this intersection here, and I want this to start in the center. I also want it to create a perfect circle, and so to do that, I'm going to hold down Shift, and that will help create a circle, and then I'll hold down Option, which I believe is Alt on a PC. And so before you do anything, go ahead and click on the mouse and start to drag just a little bit, and then hold down Shift, and then hold down Option. And I'm going to go ahead and stretch this out to about 3/4 of an inch. On the last one, I did a full inch, and I think that was a little too big. So we'll knock this one down to 0.075. And there we go. Now you'll notice this, just like our rectangles, this doesn't have a fill. If I shrink it down a little bit, you can see. And so we need to create a fill for this, and we want it to match the color underneath it. So with this selected, I'm going to go over and, well, I don't even need to click the fill button. I can just come right over to the eyedropper. And I'm going to go ahead and go down to the second eyedropper. And if I click this, it will fill it with that. So now that I have that fill taken care of, I'm going to go ahead and rather than dragging out 2 more of these, I'm going to go ahead and just hit the V key to get the selection tool. And then I'm going to hold down Option, which again is Alt on a PC, and click and drag out 2 additional circles. And as you can see, they're going to snap right to that center point, which is very convenient. And there we go. Okay, so same process. I'm going to go ahead and find the one that is selected, which is currently this one. Go back to the eyedropper tool and just simply click the box below it. Then we'll hit the V key to get the selection tool back, and then we'll click this center one and go over to the eyedropper tool, which if you want to use the key command is the letter I. So let's do that. I'm going to hit the I key, and I'm going to click in this box, and that fills in our circle. These are all just little shortcuts that'll help you get this work done a lot faster. Okay, so now we need to add in some images. Now, I have a tutorial where we do this in Photoshop, and in Photoshop, you actually have access to custom shapes. But in InDesign, we do not. So we're gonna need to grab some images to help populate these circles. Let's go ahead and select those images. To add in those images, I'm gonna go up to File, Place, and that takes me to these 3 icons that I found online. And so I just found these on the internet, and again, I'm going to use these to denote what the sections are. So the cool thing about InDesign is that it's going to allow us to select all of these right now. I don't have to do them one at a time. So I'll hold down Command and I'll click on each one of these and hit Open. And what that does is it loads up my cursor with the images. Okay, now that I have my cursor loaded up, the one thing I want to make sure is that I don't just click to add these photos. I want to actually adjust the size as I'm doing this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of put my mouse right in the middle of this upper left circle, and I'm going to drag out a box. By dragging out a box, that way I can control the size of the frame, and so I'll go ahead and do that for this one as well. It allows me to basically create a frame as I'm adding the photo. And you'll notice that we do have some area in the back where it is not filled in, and that's okay. We'll go ahead and adjust that in a minute. And now for each one of these, I'll just zoom in a little bit and come over here and just kind of drag this into the center. And then I'll hold the space bar down. I'll come over and do the same with this one. And that looks good. And this one looks pretty well centered. Since we have this white background, it seems like it would make sense to extend that into the circle. So let's go ahead and select the circle, and let's grab that eyedropper, and let's click on the white background. And it kind of looks a little weird, but what we'll do is we'll add a stroke to this circle that matches the color underneath it. So we'll go to the envelope, and again, I want to make sure I grab the selection tool, click on the circle, and then I'll hit the I key, and we'll just select that white. We'll go back to the V key to select the circle, and then the I key to select the white. What we'll do next is we'll come over, and now with this circle selected, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a stroke. Currently, if you look in the properties, the stroke is set to none. Okay, you'll notice that if we click on the yellow, it's actually going to apply the stroke to the yellow fill, which is strange because we have the stroke selected, but that's just what it's going to do. So what we need to do is we're going to hit the V key, click off all of these. Okay, so at this point, we need to add these 3 colors to our swatches. And that can be done easily by coming over and selecting one of these rectangles. And then we'll go up to where it says fill, and we'll just hit the plus button down here. And that says new swatch. So you can see right there, it just added that color. Now we'll come over to the middle one and we'll select it, and we'll go up to fill, and we'll hit the plus key. Go over and select the last rectangle on the left, and we'll go up to where it says fill, and we'll hit the plus key at the bottom of this window. And there we go. Now we could save these and give them a title, but in this case, I just want to have them on my swatches so that I can use them for the strokes on these white circles. So now we can go ahead and select our circles. So we'll come over and grab this one, and I'm going to go to where it says stroke, and I'm going to click to make a 3-point stroke, and it's defaulting to white. So I'll go ahead and click on the stroke color, and I'll just scroll down to the bottom and grab the appropriate color to match the rectangle beneath it. We'll do the same thing here. We'll add a stroke of 3 pixels, and then go to the stroke fill color and select the center one. And then finally, we'll head over to the last one, select the circle, add a 3-point stroke, and then go to the stroke color and scroll down, and we'll find that yellow. There we go. So now we have a nice little outline around those circles that helps kind of keep it in theme with our layout. Okay, so we have all of our colors laid out. Now it's time to add in the hero image, and that's the image that's going to go right here. Now we have a blue solid there for now, which we'll keep there, but we're going to lower the opacity on this to make it a little bit easier for our text to stand out. So before I add in the image, I'm going to go ahead and drag this out of the way. Okay, so to put our hero image in, we're going to go ahead and grab the frame tool, and we're going to drag out a frame from the upper left bleed down to the top of our yellow rectangle right there. And once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and go up to File, Place, and I have an image picked out right here, so we'll just open that one up. And as you can see, it comes in way too big. So first thing I want to do is come over to the right-hand side where it says Frame Fitting in the Properties window, and I'm going to click this button right there. And that's going to help fit the image to the frame that I dragged out. But on top of that, I want to also adjust the image a little bit. I want to try to bring it down just a touch, maybe frame out these deck chairs and give me a little bit more sky that I can write my text in where it's not overlapping the house. I think that'll make it easier to read against that background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this little circle right here, and I'm going to drag the image down. And you can see that it still stays inside the frame, but it gives me a little bit more of that sky. And I can go down just a touch further, and that should be enough to work with. If I need to adjust that, I can change that later. And so obviously we're running into an issue where we are overlapping some of these images right here. And it's worth taking a second and going over to the Layers panel. And if we click that and open it, we can see that our photo is currently on the top layer. We can also see by this little blue box right here that it's also selected. If I wanted to, I could manually just drag this down below those circles, and you can see that looks good right there. But I'm going to go ahead and undo that because there's another way to do it as well, and that's go over to Object, Arrange, and it looks like I deselected it, so let's click on it again, and go to Object, Arrange, Send Backwards, which will drop it down one layer, and if I go Send to Back, it'll put it all the way on the bottom. And you can see now that by hitting Send Back, that image went all the way to the bottom, and now everything is on top of it, which looks good. I'm going to go ahead and grab my blue rectangle and drag that back on top as well. And that looks pretty good too, except that we can't see the photo. So with the blue rectangle selected, I'm going to come over to where it says Appearance, Opacity, and then where it says 100%, I'm going to drop that down to just about 40%. And that still keeps the blue coloring there, but allows you to see enough of the image. So now that we have all of our images laid out, if we take a look back at the original, we can see that now it's just time to add in some text. At this point, if we're going to add in some text, it makes sense to drag out a few more guides. Let's zoom in a little bit more here. And I'm going to go ahead and close that window. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and drag out a guide that goes right through the middle of these rectangles. So I'm just going to click up in the ruler at the top and drag out a guide and wait for it to snap at the halfway mark, which might be a little bit high, to be honest, because those circles are kind of impeding on our text a little bit. But at least by having that there, we know where we are and we can do we can adjust it from there. We could also drag out a guide and put it right at the bottom of those circles if we wanted to, and then try to find the halfway point between that guide and the bottom. That looks pretty decent. Okay, so let's go ahead and grab the text tool, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag out a text box. And the reason I want to do that is because if I drag out a box, then I can come over here to where it says paragraph, and I can set it to centered aligned. And what that will do is it'll put the cursor right in the middle, and as I type out my information, like this fake phone number here, it's going to grow from the center. And there we go. I'm going to drag that out and select it, and I'm going to change the fill color to white. And in this case, inside of InDesign, they call that paper. So we'll click that. We could also go ahead and change our font because I'm not going to use Minion Pro. I'm going to go with something like Helvetica. And there it is right there, Helvetica New. All right. And one thing you'll notice is that looks pretty good on the darker color, but I have a feeling like when we get to this yellow, it's going to get a little bit lost. So we might think about adding a little drop shadow just to make it pop a bit more. One thing that we could do now is just like we did before with the rectangles, is we could hold down the Option key and just drag this right over here, and that's going to duplicate that text. And the nice part is that way the color is already set and the font is set as well. So over here, I'll change this to my E. And then we'll drag out one more. So again, I'm going to grab the selection tool. I'm going to, with this selected, I'm going to hold down Option and drag it over. And it should snap to the center. There we go. And on this one, I'll put in an address. Now you notice that if I try to type in a zip code, it's not going to allow me to because the text box isn't large enough, which is not a big deal. We'll just grab the selection tool and we'll just come over here and drag it down a little bit. And there we go. And we can drag this up to kind of just go right through the center of that text. I think that looks good. Okay, not sure what happened over here. Let's hit Command Z. That was weird. Okay, so as you can see, we got a line above and a line below, and then one going right through the guide. So I'm going to do the same thing with these, and I'm just going to select them and use the arrow keys and just get that so it's basically going right down the center. All right, that looks pretty good. But like I said, is it bold enough? Not sure. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at this in preview mode. So if we come all the way over here to our toolbar and we go all the way to the bottom and hover over this box where it says normal, if we hold the mouse down, you can then go down to preview. And that's going to basically pull off all of the guides and give us a little bit easier time seeing what we're looking at. That looks good. And it feels like our text is sitting a little bit low. I think I want to bring it up to be in line with this top line up here. Let's at least see what it looks like. So for this, I'll go back to the normal view, and I'm going to select the email and hold down Shift and also select the phone number. That selects them both, which just makes it easier to move them up together. And I might move this one up as well. There we go. So now the middle line of this is sitting on the guide, and we'll take a look again and see how we feel about that. I feel like that looks a little bit better. The margin below and the margin above seem more consistent, and obviously the side margins look pretty good. So yeah, that's going to work for now. And now let's go ahead and add some text up in the top. And to do that, we'll kind of do the same process. We'll go back to normal view, and we'll drag out some guides. And I'm not too concerned about where they are. I'm really kind of just looking at the photograph and thinking right about there. Let's take this one down to about a 1/2 inch. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag out a box for my title, and then we'll fill that in with some text. I'm going to go ahead and set that to Helvetica as well. Now the nice thing about InDesign is that any fonts you've used recently will be right up at the top of your font, your character window, your font window. So we'll go ahead and hit Helvetica New, and I'm going to go ahead and set this to a weight of bold. On top of that, I'm also going to come all the way down to the bottom here where it says Change Case, and I'm going to make everything uppercase. Okay, it looks good. Then we'll come back up to the font size, and we'll bump that up to something pretty big like 25. And that looks all right. Okay, cool. And now I'm going to also change the font color to white. So we'll go to where it says Fill, and we'll choose Paper. And now that I have that done, I'm going to hold down Option, and I'm going to drag the text box over to the far right and use it again because it has all the colors and font already set up. And so for this one, I'm going to change it to the name of the real estate company, which is Next Day Real Estate Photography. But in this situation, I actually want this to be right aligned as opposed to left aligned. So let's come over to our properties panel, and where it says paragraph, we'll choose right align or align right. And we can also change it to, well, we need to select the text and then go down to change case. And we'll make this uppercase as well. Cool, that looks pretty good. Nice and bold, easy to read. Now I'm going to drag out a guide. Actually, I can take the guide that I already have. And we're going to have a tough time getting that guide because it's sitting on our text box. So here's a situation where we have this text box and I want to put some text underneath it. But if you've ever dealt with layers like this, you know that overlapping layers can be really tricky. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go up to Object, Fitting, Fit Frame to Content. And you'll see that that tightens up the text frame right around my text. So we'll do the same thing over here, just to get rid of all this extra unneeded frame space. So we'll select it, we'll go to Object, Fitting, Fit Frame to Content. Cool. And then we'll drag out another text box. So let's probably grab one more guide and slide it down, I don't know, usually about half the size of the text above it, but we can play that one by ear. So right about there looks good. And I'm going to drag out a text box inside of there, roughly the length of my name. And I'm going to type out the word photographer. Here we go. And we'll select it. We'll go over to our character window and we'll change it to Helvetica. But for this one, I'm going to leave it lowercase and I'm going to set it to something like Helvetica Thin. Maybe not thin. Let's try something like light. See how that looks. And while we're there, we should probably change the color to match the text above. So we'll go to Fill and we'll set it to Paper. And I'm looking at the size and I'm thinking it's just a little bit small. Now the problem is we don't have much room below us, so if I try to increase the font size, you'll see that it's most likely going to disappear. And when it disappears, that just means you see this little red check that shows up. That just means we have more text than what will fit in the box. So I can just grab the lower control handle and just stretch it out a little bit. And I know that it's now sitting below the guide, and that's okay. I can move the guide down if I want. And at this point, it looks pretty good with a 16-point font. So I'm going to come over to the other side. Now, again, rather than dragging out a new box, I think I'm going to just simply hold down Option and drag a copy over here. And in this one, I will type in real estate photography. All right, and we'll change the word estate to caps. And just like we did before, we'll select this and right align it. There you go. That looks pretty good right there. If we hit the selection key to click off, and then maybe we come down here and give it a quick look in preview mode. Obviously, this is time to bring in some margins. So you can see that we're way too close to the edges, and that just looks strange. We'll go back to normal, but what we're going to do now is we're going to go up to Layout, Margins and Columns. And now it's time for us to add in some margins, because we didn't do it earlier because we wanted these 3 columns to take up the entire page. But now we're going to go ahead and where it says top and bottom, we can set those to, let's go for a 1/4 inch. Notice when I clicked on top, it didn't affect all of these. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to click this little lock right here. That will apply it to the inside, the outside, and everywhere, which is what we want. So we'll click OK. And now I can select multiple things by holding down Shift. And so I'll grab the name and the title, and I'll just use the Shift key with the arrows to kind of nudge it into position. That looks pretty good right there, although I think I could go up just a bit so that my name is at just about the top of the margin and all the way over to the left. And then we'll do the same thing with this one. We'll hold down Shift and select both text layers, and we'll drop it down using the arrow key and then slide it to the left using the left arrow key. There we go. That looks pretty good. There's nothing really overlapping. Everything seems very easy to read. So let's go ahead and take a look at it in preview mode. Okay, and we'll deselect. All right, that's looking pretty good. The only issue that I want to address is the potential for some of this to be a little tricky to read. While I think I can read this okay, if I had chosen lighter colors, I think the white would be tough to read. So I'm just going to show you how we can quickly add a little drop shadow to make that pop a little bit more. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select each one of these by holding down Shift. And then I'm going to go up to Window, Effects. And we can see that if we go up to the Effects window, right down here where you see this little FX button, you can add effects. The fact is we don't even have to do that, because that little Effects button lives right here on our Properties tab. So with all 3 of these selected, I'm going to go ahead and click on that and choose Drop Shadow. Now by default, this drop shadow looks absolutely terrible, but the main problem is the distance is too high. You can see it's just too far. So let's set that down to 0. Yeah, I think 0 is going to work. Even now, I still think it's a little bit rough. So I'm going to shrink down the size just a little bit. Maybe set it to about 0.0625. And that's better. It's definitely easier to read, but I still think it looks a little bit tacky. So I'm going to go over to opacity and drop that down to about 40. So it's just giving it a little bit of extra punch. Click OK. Makes it a little bit easier to read. So with this window open, we can just kind of click this box right here and turn it off and turn it on and see if we like it. Again, something I wouldn't probably normally add, but in the case of making it easier to read, I think that is a good time to use it. And of course, you could also change it to a different color if you wanted to by clicking this little black box right here. But I'm going to go ahead and leave it as it is. Okay, so just like that, we managed to complete the front page, and I think it looks good, or the front of the card. And now, let's go ahead and head over to the second page, because this is going to be a whole lot easier now that we have all of this built, because we can copy almost everything out of this image into this image right here. So let's go ahead and click on it to select it. And I'm going to go ahead and make a few changes here. I'm going to go up to Object, Margins and Columns. So we'll go ahead and leave this set to 3 columns, and we'll click OK. And if we come over here and set it back to normal view, we can see there are our columns. And what we want to do is we want to divide this basically into like a tic-tac-toe board. We want to create thirds on the right as well. So let's go ahead and think about that for a second. We need to divide 4 inches into thirds, which is going to be 1 inch and a third for each one. And so let's go ahead and drag out some guides. So if we need 1/3 of an inch, 1.33 should get us right there. And this one will be 2.66. And there we go. So now we have this divided into thirds, both horizontally and vertically. And what we're going to do with this side is we're going to put in a color here, here, and here. We're going to add circles right at the front. And then we'll have this whole area for our hero image, which we may or may not add an image. You'll see what we're talking about here. So I'm going to go ahead and come up to this rectangle. And I could hold Option and drag it down, and that's going to work just fine. And then I'll come up to this rectangle and hold down Option and drag it down. And notice we don't have the bleed on this one, so I'll pull this one over just a little bit. And then we'll grab this yellow one as well, hold Option, and drag it down into place. And then it's a good idea to zoom in a little bit and make sure that our lines are actually on the margins, which, as you can see, that one is not. And interestingly enough, this orange is overlapping that orange. So I'm going to select the middle one and just nudge it down with the arrow keys. And as you can see, that one is actually a little bit bigger. So I could just tuck that down there, and now everything fits nicely. And then let's do the same thing. Actually, let's grab our top one and we'll drag that up to the bleed, and we'll click on the bottom one and drag that down to the bleed. And then we'll come over and grab our blue layer and hold Option and copy it down to our area down here. And I'm not sure why we're not seeing it. For some reason, it doesn't seem to have a fill. But that's not a big deal, because we can just go over to, with it selected, we can go over to fill, and we can choose a light blue color. And now we have basically the other side, but I also want to include these circles. So we can go ahead and select them and hold down Option. And I just want the circle. I don't want the icon, and you'll see why in a second. Now this is where it can be a little bit tricky to grab this stuff and copy it. So let's come over here and click off everything and see if I can just select that circle. Notice I'm having a tough time because the blue layer keeps getting selected. Let's try selecting it from the bottom, and there we go. Now we have it. We'll hold Option and we'll drag. Now, we didn't get the circle, we ended up getting the image, so let's zoom in a little and make life easier and see if we can't click on the circle itself. And we'll grab Option and drag, and there we go. That's what we were looking for. And I'm going to just go ahead and drag all of these off right now while I'm zoomed in. It can definitely be a little tricky to select these things, but once you've got them, Option, drag makes it easy I'm going to put my finger on the space bar and move the document over. And then again, click, try to make sure I'm getting the circle and Option drag. All right. Now I'm going to hit Command minus. That will allow me to shrink the screen down, and I can come over here and use the guides that actually pop up. Notice that just by dragging this into place, I get my smart guides that pop up and let me know when I'm centered. And one more here as well. Okay, cool. Now, for this part of the card, I was thinking that I would put my specialties. So if we're talking about real estate photography, I could add in video tours, I could add in drone photography, and in this case, I could also add in twilight photography. So since I don't feel like dragging out a new text box, I'm going to just grab one of these ones we already have and hold down Option and drag this one down to here. And then once I've got that in place, I will hold down Option and drag out two more, making sure to wait for the smart guides to pop up so everything's kind of centered. And that looks pretty good. So then I can zoom in. And again, it's always worth clicking and just making sure that everything is centered. You can see right next to the 0 where my mouse is, I'm getting a vertical and a horizontal line. I'm going to do that for each one of these. Make sure that I am both horizontally and vertically centered. There we go. Okay, so let's type in some of our specialties like aerial photography. That's not how you spell aerial. Aerial photography. And for this one, we could add in video tours. And for this one, let's go with something like twilight photos. So I want to make these uppercase, so I'm just going to click on each one of them and come down to the bottom. Actually, I need to get the text tool out and select the text. And then I have the option to change the case to upper. So I'll do that for each one of these. Now, as you can see, that's going to increase the size of the text, which may fill up our text box. We'll see. So there's a situation where we ran into not having quite enough space. So I'm just going to grab the selection tool and come over and stretch the text box out a little bit, and there we go. But I still don't like how close it is to that circle, so I am going to change that from photography to photos. All right. And just like before, we do want, now that we're working with text, we do want to have a margin. So let's go up to Layout, Margins and Columns. And let's make sure that our lock is set to locked. We're going to change this to 0.125 and click OK. And that just gives us our margins so we can tell if anything is going further out than we want it to. And then we can come over here and put in the name of our company. So I'm going to make this nice and big. And I'm also going to drag out a guide so I can put it right in the center. Having a little trouble seeing that guide, so as you can see, this blue guide is just not working over this blue color. I'm going to go up to Layout, and I'm going to go to Ruler Guides. And up here, I can change the color of that guide from cyan to something like red. And then now if I drag this guide out, you can see that we have a red guide that is much easier to see than the blue guide before it. All right, so I'll go ahead and put my text tool. I'm going to drag out a text box into this little center area here, and we'll type in next day real estate photography. And then we'll take a few minutes and just get it all formatted. So we'll go with the first word. We'll come over to the character window and we'll change that to Helvetica right there. And we'll make it nice and big, probably bigger than we had it on the other page. And we'll go ahead and set it to bold. And then we'll come down to the bottom where it says change case and we'll make it uppercase. That looks good. And then we can do the same thing with the text underneath it. In fact, we need to make both of these white, so let's go ahead and select both of them and then choose the fill and set that to paper. And we'll go ahead and click off. And then we'll just select the bottom line of text. And I'm going to try to make this roughly the same size as the text above it. And with all this space, I could definitely go bigger. So let's go ahead and take next day and make that even bigger. Let's bump that up. There you go. 47 pixels works for me. Your size may vary. And then I'll go down to real estate photography and just hit the up button until I'm just about the same length. But I do want to change the weight, and I do want to change the font, which makes sense to do that before I get to set on my sizes. I'm going to change the there to light, and look at that, fits perfectly right there. So we'll click off, and then we'll come over and just center this as best as we can. And I'm looking at this spot right here as being our center, that X, and that looks pretty good right there. Let's go ahead and turn off the guides. We'll set it to preview. And that looks pretty decent. The only thing we need now is some icons that would fit into those circles. And now that I look at the text, it's all kind of sitting right above that center line. I feel like it needs to come down just a little bit. So I'll click on that one. And again, just use the arrow keys. Same thing with this one. And it looks like about 2 clicks on each one of those gets them kind of nice and centered with the center of the circle. Another thing you could do is you could use these 2 points right here and just drag a guide right onto those, which we're kind of so many guides right now, it's a little tricky to see. But if I put it right over that, then I know that I'm in the center. And that one looks good. That one needs to come down just a bit. Looks like this text could come down just a few clicks. And this one, the guide looks good. And we'll drop that text down just 1 or 2 clicks. And when I say clicks, I mean I'm using the arrow keys to nudge the text. Okay, so back to preview for a quick look. In fact, we could zoom out a little bit and look at both of them, and all of a sudden, we have something that's starting to look pretty good. So really all we need to do now is drop in some icons for the additional images, and we will be done. Okay, so the easiest way to find icons to fit these would be to literally just go to the internet and type in things like drone icon. And if I go to images, I will see lots of different options. And generally I want to kind of find ones that all sort of fit together and look good together. So let's see. I think I could probably use this one right here. So I'm just going to right click and choose Save Image to Downloads. And then we need Video Tours. And what I like to do generally is I'll come over to my downloads folder, and you can see there's my 3 icons right there. So I'm just going to hold down Command, select all of them, and then right click and choose New Folder from Selections and call this BizCard Side 2 Icons. And then I'll move that into my Indesign folder. And once I've done that, then I can zoom back in over here and we'll go to File, Place, and I can navigate to those icons. And there they are. So I'll just hold down Command and I'll select each one of them and choose Open. And just like we did before, I'm just going to drag out a box while I'm adding the photo. If I just click, it's going to add the photo at full size, and that's not what I want. So I'm going to come over and just kind of click about right there and just drag diagonally. I don't want to go too big. And then I can always nudge them around a little bit just using the arrow keys, but I'll wait till I'm done putting them in to do that. Wrong one. Go right here, right in the upper quarter. And this one's a rectangle, so it's a little bit different. And then I'll just drag this one out as well. There we go. Okay, so now again, just grab the selection tool, click on the image, and just use the arrows to center it. And there we go. We zoom out. And now we have front and back, two sides to our business card with all of our information. The only thing that is bugging me just a little bit at this point is the words video tours right there. It feels like our margin is shorter on the right than it is on the left. So I'm just going to select it and nudge it over and try to get it nice and centered. And that looks better. And with that, folks, we are done. I hope you learned something about shapes and rectangles. And most importantly, I hope you learned that option dragging is a really fast way to speed up your workflow. So, hope this worked well for you. Best of luck. And I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial.